Welcome to Twilight Fables, where bedtime means something wicked this way comes. Tonight, we begin our descent into the shadowed halls of an ancient manor, and a tale whispered by those who survived. This is the house of Bluebeard. No one remembered when the first girl went missing, only that it happened in the spring. In the village of Dunlaw Vale, nestled between the teeth of a dark forest and the bones of a mountain, the seasons came with routine. Thaw, bloom, harvest, and death. There were festivals for the new moon, a feast for the first frost, and an old superstition no one dared speak aloud. When the fog rolled in from the east, someone would vanish. They never found bodies, never found blood, just empty beds and grief carried like ash in the wind. Elodie Varney was only a child when she first heard the warnings from her grandmother, a sharp-eyed crone with smoke-coloured hair and a voice like dry leaves. If the fog comes before the equinox, bar your doors, no songs, no candles, and never answer the knock. The villagers pretended it was nonsense, but Elodie noticed the way they looked at the fog, how even the dogs refused to bark when it crept through the wheat fields, how parents held their daughters close without explaining why. By the time Elodie turned 19, her grandmother was buried, her sisters were married, and the village had grown quiet again. No girls had vanished in nearly 5 years. Some believed the curse had passed, and then, on a windless morning in mid-September, he arrived. The stranger came on a coach blacker than pitch, its wheels leaving no tracks in the damp soil. 6 horses, silver-eyed and silent, pulled it as if from a dream or a nightmare. When the door opened, a tall man emerged, dressed in a deep navy coat, embroidered with strange patterns that shimmered faintly in the sun. His beard was the colour of ink, diluted with blue flame. His eyes were pale, almost luminescent, and when he smiled, it was the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lord Alaric Beaumont, he introduced himself at the inn that very day. Though some call me Bluebeard, the townsfolk pretended not to flinch. Bluebeard took up residence in the old Thorn estate, a crumbling manor said to be uninhabitable after a fire decades ago. Yet, within a week, the ivy was trimmed, the windows gleamed, and smoke curled from its chimneys like breath from a sleeping giant. He was charming when he wished to be, generous with coin, polite if distant. He spoke with a soft, cultured accent none could place, and yet he understood the village customs too well for a foreigner. He said little of his past. Whispers flew. A widower, no, a collector, no, a noble banished from the capital. Elodie, like the rest of the village, watched from afar. But unlike the others, she wasn't afraid. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, a seamstress mostly, though she spent more time reading her grandmother's old books than stitching gowns. Her sisters, Mirelle and Cassia, were older, more practical, more afraid of things that didn't bleed when cut. They were the first to warn her. "Don't look at him like that," Cassia whispered one night. "He's not for you." "Something's wrong with him," Morel added. "He's too polished, too still." But Elodie felt drawn to him, like a moth that recognizes its flame. She didn't know what she saw in him. Perhaps the loneliness he wore like perfume, or perhaps it was something deeper, an echo of a forgotten life, a story half remembered from her dreams. They spoke one evening at the baker's stall, both reaching for the same blackcurrant tart. She laughed. He smiled, and that night a single blue rose was left on her doorstep, wrapped in silk. Their courtship was swift but strange. Bluebeard was attentive but never possessive, curious but never probing. He asked of her dreams, her childhood, her fears, never of her family, never of her future. He took her walking by the lake, always near twilight. They danced once, under the full moon, to music only he could hear. He never spoke of love, and yet, 3 weeks later, he knelt in the village square during the market day, offered a ring carved from moonstone, and asked Elodie to be his wife. The village fell silent, even the birds paused. Her sisters begged her to refuse, but her heart, traitorous, trembling, said yes. The wedding was held the next morning. No guests were invited. No priest was summoned. Only the wind attended, and it howled through the chapel ruins, where they exchanged their vows under a sky thick with clouds. Bluebeard whispered words in a language Elodie didn't understand. She repeated them anyway, her mouth tasting of copper and cold. He kissed her hand, not her lips, and helped her into the black coach. She looked back once at the village she'd known all her life. Her sisters stood together, arms around each other, faces pale as milk. The fog rolled in just before they vanished from view. The road to Bluebeard's estate twisted through thickets of trees, older than maps. As they rode, the sky darkened though the sun had not yet set. Shadows danced at the edge of vision. Once, Elodie thought she saw a woman standing by the trees, her mouth wide open as if to scream, but no sound came and she was gone. The house revealed itself slowly, like a bruise beneath the skin, grey stone, mottled with lichen, towers like broken teeth, windows like eyes too long, without sleep. And then the gates opened on their own. Elodie stepped into her new life beneath a sky that wept ash instead of rain. The servants greeted her in silence, men and women with faces worn smooth as riverstone, their eyes hollow, their movements unnervingly synchronized. No one smiled, no one blinked. Bluebeard took her hand and said, "You are home." She wanted to believe him, but as the great doors groaned shut behind her, she could not shake the feeling that she had stepped not into a house, but into a tomb that had been waiting for her. The entry hall of Bluebeard's estate was colder than the wind outside, and twice as still. Its ceiling soared beyond sight, vanishing into gloom, pierced only by a single iron chandelier, dripping with waxen stubs. Marble statues loomed in the corners, women in sorrow, cloaked in veils, hands raised to shield their eyes. The floor beneath Elodie's boots creaked like old bones. There was no fire in the hearth, there was no scent of baking bread, nor of life, just the faded perfume of dust and time. Bluebeard led her up the grand staircase, one hand still curled gently around hers, his skin cool and dry like worn parchment. The banister was carved with twisting vines and small winged creatures that Elodie didn't recognize, part bird, part worm, part human. She touched one absent-mindedly, and it felt warm. A trick of the mind, she told herself. The corridors were endless. Some sloped downward, though they seemed to rise. Others ended in mirrors, framed in rusted iron. Occasionally, Elodie caught glimpses of herself, but not always dressed the same, not always alone. At last, they reached her chambers. Bluebeard opened the door and stepped aside. "This is yours," he said. It was grand, a high, domed ceiling with murals faded into smoke, velvet curtains the colour of dying roses, a four-poster bed carved from dark wood, its canopy embroidered with crescent moons, a wardrobe taller than a man, a dressing table with a mirror that looked like it hadn't seen light in a century, and beside the hearth, which crackled weakly with a fire of pale blue flame, a harp with strings of gold. "I had it tuned," he murmured, noticing her gaze. She turned to him. "Do you play?" He smiled faintly. "I used to, but time has robbed me of that gift." He touched her cheek, just once, before stepping back. "I'll let you rest. Supper is at dusk. You'll hear the bell." "Will I see the rest of the house?" she asked. In time, the door closed with a click that echoed like a coffin lid. She did not rest. Instead, Elodie explored what she could of her chambers. The wardrobe held dozens of dresses in shades of midnight, frost, and bone, not a single stitch of colour. The mirror, when she stood before it, showed her reflection without issue, though when she turned away, she thought she saw her hair shift unnaturally, as if something had brushed it from behind. She opened every drawer and found only one of them locked, a thin, flat one beneath the dressing table. No key, no clue, but in the firelight she noticed something else, carved faintly into the stone beneath the hearth. "Don't look too long, don't listen too close." She blinked, and the message was gone. Supper was served in a dining hall that felt less like a room and more like a forgotten cathedral. A massive table stretched the length of the chamber, yet only 2 chairs sat at its head. The servants moved noiselessly, faces expressionless, setting down covered trays. Bluebeard watched her as she ate, though his own plate remained untouched. "You should eat more," he said gently. You'll need your strength here. For what? He smiled again, that same distant expression. For discovering who you are. A strange answer, but not the strangest thing that night. The food tasted fine, but every time she looked away, the contents shifted slightly. Berries rearranged, bread warm again. Once, the roast duck blinked. She ate only half. Over the next week, Bluebeard gave her keys, dozens of them, some ornate, some plain. They opened doors to parlours, libraries, music rooms, drawing rooms, greenhouses. But every room was abandoned. Dust lay thick. Sheet-covered furniture stood like ghosts. The piano in the music room had no keys, only jagged black holes. Why are they all unused? She asked him once. Because their previous owners are gone. Your wives? He did not answer. He only handed her another key. You may go anywhere you like, he said, but not through the door at the end of the west wing. What's in it? A part of me that is not fit for love. That night, Elodie dreamed of corridors with walls that bled and a door with teeth. She tried to distract herself. She played the harp until her fingers blistered. She read books from the library, though some were in languages she didn't recognize, and one whispered back when she shut it. She painted, but every face she drew blurred before completion. The servants did not speak. When she asked questions, they bowed and retreated, and the door at the end of the west wing stood waiting, always locked. Its frame bore carvings worn smooth with time. She pressed her ear against it once and heard what sounded like breathing, slow, heavy, wet. She backed away, trembling, but each day it seemed closer than before. One morning she followed a servant carrying linens just to see where they went. Down twisting stairs, deeper into the belly of the house. The walls changed, no longer wallpapered, but stone. The air thickened. She lost the servant halfway down a narrow hallway that ended in 2 iron doors. One was open, the other sealed shut with wax. She turned to leave, but behind her the air grew cold, and in the dim candlelight she saw a smear of red on the wall. Fingertips, drag marks, the shape of a woman's face barely visible, as if someone had tried to claw their way through stone. She fled. Bluebeard noticed her silence at dinner. The house is affecting you, he said. It does that. What is this place? A sanctuary, a prison, a mirror. She frowned. Of what? Of the one who dwells within it. His eyes bored into her. You will come to understand, Elodie, but understanding comes at a cost. You must choose when you are ready to open the door, to know the truth. That night she awoke to music, a lullaby played on harp strings that hummed like wind in a crypt. She stepped into the hallway. The servants stood motionless, heads turned toward the west wing, all of them staring. The door was still shut, but she could have sworn it was breathing. Time lost its shape inside the house. Days passed, or perhaps hours. There were no clocks. The sun rarely pierced the thick curtains, and when it did, it cast a strange greenish hue through the glass, as if even daylight had been changed by the house. Elodie marked her days by meals, and even those came without rhythm. Sometimes dinner appeared at noon. Sometimes breakfast arrived in the middle of the night. There were no bells anymore, and yet Bluebeard remained as composed as ever. He came and went without sound. He would appear at her shoulder and vanish just as easily. Sometimes he joined her for walks in the garden, which seemed larger every time she stepped into it. Other times he would simply sit in the corner of her room while she played harp, unmoving, silent, statuesque. "Do you ever leave the house?" she asked him once. He had smiled faintly. "Why would I leave what I've waited centuries to possess?" She had tried to laugh, but the chill that lingered in her bones refused to thaw. She began hearing things. At first, she blamed the wind. The house moaned when the storms came, its rafters crying like a child. But soon, even in perfect stillness, there were whispers behind the walls, soft, familiar, desperate names. Elodie. The voice would call her name in the night, barely more than breath. She thought it came from the mirror at first, its surface fogged, even when the room was cold. She covered it with a cloth. The voice grew louder. The next night, she heard crying from the dressing table drawer, the one that had no key. She lay on the bed and pressed her hands over her ears, but still she heard it. Soft sobs, choked gasps, fingernails dragging against wood. She tried to ask the servants. They never looked at her. One dropped a folded cloth at her feet. Elodie bent to pick it up and found words stitched inside in thread so pale it was almost invisible. "You're not the first." The next day, she searched the house. Bluebeard had left. No note, no warning, just gone. The keys sat in a box by her bed. She took them all and wandered from room to room. In the library she found a book titled The Brides of Winter. Its spine cracked when she opened it, and the pages wept water. All the words were written in ink that turned red when exposed to light. She left it on the shelf and locked the door behind her. In the music room, she found another harp. This one was broken, its strings tangled like spider webs. Beneath it, a pair of slippers, so small they must have belonged to a child. One of them had a name sewn inside, Isabeau. In the northern wing, she discovered a conservatory filled with dead plants, roses grown black, stems lined with teeth. A single orchid bloomed among them, purple and perfect. When she bent to smell it, it whispered, "Don't trust him." She ran. The west wing door waited. Each time she passed it, it seemed changed. Once, its frame was cracked. Another time, The knob bled rust onto the floor, and the breathing, oh the breathing, grew louder. One night, Elodie pressed her palm against the wood and whispered, "What's behind you?" Something whispered back, "Me." She began dreaming of women. In her sleep, they stood at the edge of her bed, their faces half-shadowed, mouths open in soundless screams. One was missing her hands, another had no eyes, the third had Elodie's own face, but weeping blurred. They never spoke, only watched, until the seventh night, when one stepped forward. She wore a gown of pearls, her neck bruised and torn, as though something had strangled her with her own jewellery. She reached out and touched Elodie's face. "He keeps us here," she said. "We are still inside the walls." "Why me?" Elodie asked. The woman tilted her head. "Because you looked." The whispers grew bolder. They called to her in daylight. She heard laughter in the stairwell. She found her own name etched into a window pane, scratched by a fingernail, fresh. One morning, she woke to find her gown stained with soil. Her feet were dirty. She had sleepwalked into the garden, but could not remember leaving her bed. She told herself to be brave. She told herself to stop imagining things. Then she opened the dressing table drawer. It was unlocked. Inside was a single ribbon, stained with blood, and a letter written in a delicate hand. "My name is Odette. I was his 7th wife. If you find this, he's chosen again. Hide the key. Do not look behind the door, and if you do, burn the house down before he returns." The letter crumbled to ash in her hands. Elodie began searching for a way out. The gates were sealed. The windows wouldn't break. The garden path turned in on itself like a maze. She tried following the servants, again, but every hallway led back to her chamber. It was as though the house had swallowed her whole. Only one door remained unopened, the forbidden one, and she knew, somehow, deep in her marrow, that whatever truth lay behind it would not stay silent much longer. The next night, she stood in the corridor outside the door. The keys trembled in her hand. One was blackened with soot. One was bone. One pulsed, faintly warm. She tried them all. The bone key fit. As it turned, the whispering stopped. The house held its breath, and from behind the door came a sound no human throat should make, wet, warbling, full of teeth. Elodie stepped back, heart racing, but the door remained shut, locked again. She looked down at the key. It was bleeding. His boots were spotless, despite the rain. He had no coat, no horse, no coach, only a single white rose in one gloved hand, and a smile too polished to be real. Elodie met him at the bottom of the staircase, the key still hidden beneath the hem of her dress, its bite-shaped teeth pressed hard against her thigh. "Did you miss me?" he asked. His voice was soft. It always was. Of course, she lied. She did not ask where he'd gone. He did not offer. That evening, he took her hand and kissed it, as though everything was normal, as though she had not spent the last week listening to ghosts bleed through walls. "I've brought you a gift," he said. He handed her the rose. "This one will never wilt." He was right. It remained cold in her palm, heavy. Not a petal dropped. Later, when she left it on her vanity, she found the mirror reflected the rose not as a flower, but as a jawbone, stripped of flesh. She buried it under the hearth ash. Elodie waited until midnight. The house was asleep, if it ever truly slept. The servants had retreated to whatever holes they emerged from, and Bluebeard was in the north tower, where he kept a study she had never entered. She took the key and walked barefoot across cold stone. The west wing was darker than before. Lamps sputtered out as she passed. The paintings on the walls seemed to change. The eyes now gone, the smiles inverted. She reached the door. Her hand hesitated. Then she turned the key. It made a sound like something drowning. The door swung open. The room was a chamber of horrors. At first, she thought it empty. Then her eyes adjusted. Candles flickered with greenish flames, each one resting on a skull. The floor was stained, black, brown, rust red, like a butcher's slaughter yard. The air was thick with a copper sweet rot, and in the centre of the room, 7 chairs. Each one held a bride, each one dressed in the colours of mourning, white and pale blue and pearl grey, now darkened by decay. Their bodies were posed like marionettes. One held a broken harp, another a faded bouquet, a third clutched a book with torn pages. They were dead, some long dead, one not quite. Elodie stepped forward, throat tight, the air turning to ice in her lungs. The first woman had no face, only a veil soaked in something black and clotted. The second's hands were fused to her lap with dried blood. The third's jaw hung open unnaturally wide, as though it had been broken mid-scream. She reached the fourth. Her hair was dark, her dress once lavender. A gash ringed her throat like a second smile. The fifth had no eyes. Her eyelids had been sewn shut. The sixth was Odette. Elodie recognised her from the dreams. Her face was still beautiful, though drawn thin with terror. Her hands were frozen mid-gesture, as if she had been trying to shield herself in her final moments. The seventh, Elodie gasped. The seventh was breathing. She dropped to her knees beside the chair. The woman was young, barely older than Elodie. Her eyes fluttered open, but her mouth was stitched shut with silver wire. Her arms trembled faintly against their restraints. Elodie reached for her, and the woman began to shake violently. Eyes rolled back, mouth foamed, blood bubbled from her nose, and a sound, half sob, half scream, tore from her throat without ever passing her lips. Elodie tried to free her. She clawed at the wire, at the rope around her wrists, but it wouldn't budge. It writhed like a living thing. A voice echoed behind her. "She belongs to the house now." Elodie spun. No one was there. She turned back to the girl. and froze. All 7 brides were looking at her. Their heads tilted, their mouths smiled, and as one, they whispered, "Soon." The candles flared and died. The door slammed shut behind her. Elodie woke on the floor outside the west wing. The key was gone. Her hands were cut. Her nightgown soaked in blood, not her own. She crawled to her room, heart a hammer in her chest. When she reached her bed, she found her pillow torn open. The feathers inside were wet, not with water, with something dark and sticky and warm. She did not sleep. The next morning, Bluebeard was waiting in her room. He held a teacup. "You look pale," he said. "Did you wander?" She said nothing. He handed her the cup. Her fingers trembled. "You opened the door." Not a question, a statement. Elodie met his eyes. They no longer looked like sky. They looked like glass, empty and dark beneath. "I saw them," she whispered. "Yes," he said simply. "You did. Why?" He tilted his head. "Because I love them, and love is preservation. You killed them." He shrugged. "Some needed help letting go. Some needed to be kept. There is more than one way to stay close, Elodie." She stood. "You won't keep me." "No," he said, "not yet." That evening, he took her to the garden. They walked beneath dead trees, their branches hung with ribbons. When she looked closer, she saw they were veins. "I will give you time," Bluebeard said, "to decide how you will stay." Stay? As a statue, a shadow, a song in the walls? He smiled. "Or, if you behave, perhaps as my wife. I am your wife." He leaned close. "Not yet. You have not bled for me." He left her there, in the cold, surrounded by trees that murmured in voices she almost recognized. She tore one of the ribbons from the branches. It bled in her hand. That night, she searched the house for weapons. She found a mirror shaped like a sickle. She found a needle longer than her finger. She found a book with a spine made of teeth. She kept all 3 beneath her pillow. The 7th bride visited her in her dreams, no longer screaming, now singing. The lullaby was soft, sweet. It ended in a scream Elodie recognized as her own. Elodie could no longer feel time. Her days blurred, not from idleness, but from constant watching, waiting for Bluebeard to make his move. He no longer pretended. There were no more sweet lies, no tender glances, no illusions of love. He no longer touched her, unless to guide her, gently but firmly, down the halls she once explored freely. The house had grown smaller, walls shifting, doors locking themselves when she approached. The west wing door never appeared again. It was as if the house had swallowed the room whole to protect its master's secret, but it was too late. Elodie had seen, and the house had seen her in return. The bleeding key had vanished from her hand the night she collapsed at the forbidden threshold, but the wound remained. a thin, jagged cut on her palm, no longer fresh, but never quite healing. It wept slowly, thick, dark blood that stained everything it touched. No matter how she bandaged it, wrapped it, pressed it, the blood seeped through, quiet, persistent, accusing. She tried hiding it from Bluebeard, but he already knew. On the third morning after her discovery, she woke to find her room transformed. The furniture had been replaced. Her wardrobe now held only ceremonial robes in shades of ivory, crimson, and pitch. The mirror above the vanity was clean again, but her reflection was not alone. Behind her stood the seventh bride, always watching. In her reflection, Elodie no longer wore white. She wore black, and the floor behind her shimmered like it was wet. That afternoon, Bluebeard summoned her to the drawing room. It was the only space in the house that felt unfinished. Its walls bore exposed brick. The furniture was threadbare, faded with mildew. No art adorned the mantel, only a single clock, which had never once moved, now ticked in time with her heartbeat. He waited by the fireplace, a glass of something red in hand. "It's time," he said. "For what?" "For the house to claim you, as it does all things I love." Elodie said nothing. "But I am not without compassion," he continued. "You may choose how you stay." "Stay?" "As a wife, obedient and preserved, as a memory interred and adored, or as a spirit, another voice whispering warnings too late." She clenched her hands at her sides, feeling the blood beneath the bandage pulse like a second heartbeat. "And if I refuse?" He smiled. "Then the house will choose for you." That night, the house began to shift. Her bed vanished. The walls of her room rippled with dampness. A mould crept from the corners like ivy. The books she had hidden under the floorboards wept ink and then turned to ash. When she looked into her mirror, the bride with the silver-stitched lips stood inches behind her, reaching. The servants stopped responding. They no longer brought food, only candles that smelled faintly of decay, and dresses that appeared folded on her chair, each one stitched with a new symbol across the chest. She burned them in the hearth. They returned the next day, untouched. On the fourth day, she found a trail of feathers in the hallway, not soft, bird-like ones, human-sized, plucked, not shed, leading toward the base of the tower. There, in a locked chamber she'd never been shown before, she discovered the bridal altar. 7 chairs, one empty, a wedding veil soaked in rosewater and salt, an iron needle and spool of golden thread, and a mirror larger than any she'd seen, one that showed not reflections, but memories. She looked into it and saw herself as a child, then as she was now, seated at the altar, and finally as a corpse, her lips sewn shut, stitched into a smile. Behind her stood Bluebeard, always the same, ageless, untouched. She fled, ran through the house barefoot, screaming, kicking at walls that laughed when struck. She found the hidden staircase again, though it hadn't been there in weeks, the one that led beneath the manor to the blood-soaked catacombs, to the hidden roots of the house. The passage spiraled downward into a cavern laced with old bone and dead roots. Candles flickered with blue flame. The walls wept. At the centre was a black pool. The surface shimmered like glass, and within she saw the faces of the brides. They were not dead, not entirely, not free, bound to him, and something deeper, something older, a presence beneath the house, something that fed not on flesh, but on devotion, dread, and the ritual of love turned to ruin. She saw it, a shape sleeping in the pool's depths, twisting, eyeless, hungry, Bluebeard's patron, his god. A voice whispered from the darkness, "You cannot save yourself." Another followed, "But you can save us." She turned to find Odette beside her, but Odette was no longer flesh. Her body shimmered like water. Her eyes burned with candlelight. He must be broken. The house must be bled. How? "You already carry the key," Odette said, reaching for Elodie's bandaged palm. She pulled the wrapping away. The wound was gone. In its place, something shimmered beneath the skin, a black sigil, pulsing with light. "You've been marked," Odette whispered. "Now mark him." Elodie rose from the catacombs before dawn. The house watched. The walls pulsed. The chandeliers swung without breeze. The mirrors cracked when she passed. And Bluebeard stood in the great hall, dressed in ceremonial robes, his arms open. "Will you stand with me?" he asked. She stepped forward. For now, the altar was ready. The servants had become shadows, flickering silhouettes cast by no flame. The mirror behind the altar reflected no one. Bluebeard raised a goblet. The wine inside moved on its own. Drink and become eternal. Elodie took the cup, raised it, paused. Then, as she locked eyes with him, she spoke. "You've preserved your brides, but you never asked what they preserved of you." Before he could answer, she smashed the goblet on the altar. The wine sizzled, and her hand, palm open, pressed against his chest. The mark burned through his robes, into his skin. He staggered. "What have you?" The mirror behind them shattered. The house groaned, and far below, in the black pool, the thing stirred. Bluebeard fell to his knees. Blood poured from his mouth, his eyes, his ears. He looked at Elodie, not with hatred, but with awe. "You were always the one," he said. "I was never yours," she replied. The altar cracked, the ceiling split, and the brides began to sing. The house was unravelling. Stones split like old fruit. Doors opened into black voids. Paintings screamed as they burned themselves off the walls. The chandeliers dropped like nooses from the ceiling, shattering on the marble floors. The moaning wind that had once crept softly through the corridors now howled with the rage of the dead, and through it all, Elodie ran. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to move, to act, to finish what had been started. The mark on her palm still glowed, bleeding thin trails of black smoke. She pressed it to the walls as she passed, branding the house room by room. Every time she did, the air rippled and shrieked, and the house recoiled like a wounded beast. Behind her, the brides followed. They came not as flesh, but as spirit, each formed from the places they had died. Odette from the blood-soaked west wing, Isabeau from the ruined conservatory, Mireille the harpist rose from the music room with fingers of wind and sorrow. They sang not in unison, but in defiance. Their voices, once whispers in the dark, now thundered, a funeral hymn turned battle cry. The house screamed in return. Elodie reached the east corridor and found it wholly transformed. Where once there had been a sunroom filled with dusty books, now a corridor stretched endlessly forward, its floor paved with bones. At its end was the great mirror she had seen in the bridal altar chamber, only now it no longer reflected, it revealed. Within its glass was a vision of the house as it once was, glorious, lush, warm. Bluebeard stood within it, whole, handsome, unmarred, but beside him were the brides, all smiling, all silent, frozen. Elodie stepped forward, and the mirror shimmered, responding to the mark on her hand. The vision cracked. 1,000 fractures webbed across the glass. The brides inside began to move, twisting, mouths opening not to sing, but to scream. Set us free. She reached for the mirror. It reached back. Hands burst from the glass, clawing the air. Dozens, hundreds, fingers bloodied, wrists bruised with shackles, fingernails torn. They grabbed her arms, her dress, her shoulders. She didn't resist. Instead, she whispered, "Come back." The glass exploded outward, not with force, but with wind. Hot, howling wind, like a furnace exhaling its fury. The hands vanished. In their place stood the brides, real, whole. Their forms flickered, half between worlds, but Elodie could see their eyes, bright, burning with will. They looked to her as one. "The heart," Odette said, "it lives beneath." "The heart of the house?" Elodie asked. Odette nodded. "Kill it, and the house dies. Kill it, and we can leave. And Bluebeard, he is the house." They descended into the earth. A second staircase had opened in the chapel, one that led not to tombs, but to something older, deeper, carved into the belly of the land itself. Each step oozed black fluid, the walls pulsed, the ceiling crawled with roots that twitched like veins. As they descended, the temperature dropped, and with it, the air thickened into something wet, something choking. Finally, they reached it. A great chamber opened before them, circular, like the inside of a rib cage. In the centre hung a massive heart, black as pitch, suspended by tendrils that pulsed in time with Elodie's mark. It beat once every few seconds, slow and loud and final. With every pulse, the walls of the manor above shook. Bluebeard stood before it. His robes were gone. His skin had peeled away, revealing something pale, translucent, bone and shadow interwoven. His beard now floated like seaweed in deep water. His eyes bled light. "You cannot kill what you belong to," he said. "I don't belong to you," Elodie replied. "I never did. But you chose me." "No, I survived you." He moved toward her, gliding rather than walking, as if the ground no longer obeyed gravity for him. The brides formed a circle around Elodie, each glowing with the echo of her life. The harpist raised her hands, and ghostly strings pulled tight between her fingers. Another bride knelt and drew a symbol in ash across the floor. Elodie stepped forward. "Let them go," she demanded. Bluebeard paused. "They would be nothing without me." "Then it's time they became something else." She raised her hand. The mark flared. The heart behind him pulsed violently, the tendrils retracting slightly, like a beast feeling pain for the first time. Bluebeard screamed, not from his mouth, but from the house itself. The chamber quaked. Blood poured from the ceiling. The brides began to chant. A lullaby turned into a curse. Each word they spoke sent cracks through the foundation. Each note made the heart stutter. Elodie ran to the altar of the heart. In her hand was the mirror shard she had taken from the shattered corridor above. She raised it high. "This is for every girl who screamed and was buried," and she plunged it into the heart. The tendrils snapped. The walls exploded outward. Bluebeard wailed, a noise that echoed across dimensions, through every stone, every bone, every mirror, and then silence. The heart crumbled to ash. The brides faded like mist in sunlight, each one smiling at her, real smiles this time, tired, grateful, free. Only Odette remained. "You've done it," she whispered. "Will you rest now?" Odette nodded. "And you?" Elodie looked back up the stairs. The house was collapsing. "I'm going to burn it to the ground." Odette smiled. "Good girl," and she vanished. Elodie emerged into daylight for the first time in what felt like centuries. The house behind her cracked, groaned, and collapsed like a lung, exhaling its final breath. As the roof fell inward, flames bloomed from the windows, blue fire, devouring the rot, the lies, the preservation. She didn't look back. She walked down the gravel path, barefoot, bloodied, alive, but not alone. In her arms was a child, wrapped in velvet, quiet, watching. She had found her in the cradle, beside the heart, unmarked, untouched, the only thing Bluebeard had not destroyed. Elodie did not know whose daughter she was, but she would raise her far, far from the house of hollow stones. Elodie never returned to Dunlaw Vale. She wandered for days after the fall of the house, a half-starved, soot-covered spectre, with a bundle in her arms and a mark on her palm that no longer bled but burned. The child she carried did not cry, not once. She had pale eyes, frosted grey, with lashes black as soot, and hair like wet flax. Though she was no more than a babe, she watched the world with the gaze of something far older. Elodie named her Marinette, not after her mother, whoever she was, but after an old word her grandmother once told her, the one who rose through shadow. It felt right. They reached a village 3 days later, smaller than Dunlaw Vale, nestled on a cliffside, wrapped in fog. Elodie begged for water and a place to rest. The villagers, wary, offered her the barn. She accepted. That night, Marinette spoke, not in words, in dreams. Elodie saw the house again, burning, but this time it did not fall. It changed. It sprouted roots. It blinked. It breathed. And beneath it, in the cavern where the heart once hung, something stirred again. Not the same. Not a god. Not Bluebeard. Something new. The child watched it, then turned to Elodie and whispered in a voice that was both hers and not. You ended him, but the house still remembers. She awoke, gasping. The child slept soundly in her arms, but from beneath the barn floor, Elodie heard the softest of knocks. 3, slow, deliberate. She did not answer. She held the child close, pressed her bandaged palm against her chest, and whispered a name she would never repeat. The knocking stopped. The next morning, she asked the village priest for ink and paper. She wrote down everything, what she had seen, what she had done, what she had become. When she finished, she placed the pages into a sealed satchel and buried it behind the chapel, beneath a tree where birds refused to perch. She carved no name on the tree, only a symbol, the mark on her hand. If anyone was foolish enough to dig there, she hoped they would at least be warned. In time, she left the cliffside village. She and Marinette travelled far, through marshes and moorlands, through old cities with red-stained windows, through forests where the trees leaned in too close. They were never followed, but sometimes she would wake in the night to find Marinette sitting upright, her pale eyes fixed on something unseen, lips moving in silence. Once, Elodie heard her say, "He had no name, so I gave him mine." Marinette never aged quite like other children. At 5, she spoke 5 languages, most of which no one had taught her. At 6, she walked into a fire and came out untouched. At 7, she found a broken mirror in an abandoned church and refused to look into it. "They're still watching," she whispered. "Who?" Elodie asked. Marinette only said, the ones he didn't keep. On her 9th birthday, Marinette asked about the house. Did it love you? Elodie shook her head. It needed me. Is that the same? Elodie held her close. No, love doesn't devour. It doesn't bury you. Marinette was quiet for a long time. Then why do I dream of its halls like they're my home? Elodie began to see signs again, reflections out of place, a ribbon tied to a tree, pulsing like it still held blood, whispers when the wind blew east. She kept moving, from town to town, never staying more than a season, always listening, never sleeping too deeply. Marinette asked fewer questions, but her eyes grew colder. On a winter's night in her 15th year, Marinette returned to their cottage late. Her boots were clean, though the snow outside was thick. Her hands were warm, though she'd carried no gloves, and in her eyes burned a familiar light. I went back, she said. Elodie dropped her teacup. Back where? To the place where it stood. There's nothing there now. She paused. But something's growing beneath. You have to stay away. I can't, Marinette said. It calls me like it called you. It tried to consume me, and it made me. Elodie froze. What do you mean? Marinette looked out the window, where the wind howled like an ancient thing. He couldn't make me with blood. He made me with what was left of the house, with all that sorrow, with the rot. That's not true. It is. I am not his, but I am what remained. Elodie began packing that night, but Marinette stood at the doorway, unmoving. I'm not leaving. You don't understand what it's doing to you. I do. It wants me to finish what he couldn't. Then I'll stop it. Can you stop me? They did not speak again for days. Marinette sat in the garden each night, whispering to the soil. The roots of the trees twisted toward her. Their house grew colder, despite the fire. And when Elodie looked into the mirror one morning, she saw her daughter standing behind her, with her mouth sewn shut. She turned. Marinette was gone. The next day, Elodie found a letter on the table. Its seal was made of wax and bone. Its writing was familiar. Mother, I love you, but you were the seed. I am the bloom. I go not to rebuild the house, but to become the one that cannot be broken. He preserved the dead. I will preserve the living. You freed us from a prison. I will build a kingdom. Elodie wept. Then she followed, but some say she never found her again. Others say she walked to the ruins of the house, found the roots pulsing with pale blue light, and buried herself beneath them, a warning to the next girl who might be drawn by fog and fortune. To this day, when the mist rises too soon in the valleys, parents whisper the same warning. Bar your doors, no songs, no candles, and never answer the knock. They say the house is gone, burned to ash, razed to bone, swallowed by the earth itself. But stories cling to ruins like ivy, and something always grows where the dead are buried, especially when they remember your name. Elodie's trail ended in a forest no one could name. Old maps showed it as open plains, New ones left it blank, but those who wandered too close told of twisted trees that bled sap the colour of milk, of moss that whispered lullabies at night, of bones blooming with wildflowers no one had planted, and of a girl in black watching from the thickets. She bore no age, no shadow, no warmth, but she remembered. Marinette had not built a house, she had built roots. They stretched for miles, spreading through soil like veins beneath skin, not visible to the eye, but felt in the heaviness of dreams, in mirrors that turned dark without cause, in children who spoke of the woman in the wood who gives names to the forgotten. She did not hunger like Bluebeard had. She gathered. She did not kill. She called. Her followers came not from bloodlines, but from pain. Women abandoned by fate, hunted by men, betrayed by fathers, buried by husbands. They arrived with burnt wrists and sealed lips, some with children of their own, all with hearts still thudding despite the weight they carried. And Marinette welcomed them. She taught them not to fear the dark. She taught them to command it. They wove veils from spider silk and sang in dead languages. They made cradles from thornwood and planted bells in graves. They whispered prayers in no known tongue, and the forest listened. Elodie, too, had found her way there, not by trail or torch, but by remembering the sound of her daughter's breath on her chest, the sound that had once replaced crying. When she entered the forest, it did not resist her. It parted, and she came to a hollow where trees curved inward like ribs. In the centre stood Marinette. She wore no crown, but the thorns grew away from her feet, and the roots pulsed to her heartbeat. Her eyes had not changed, still pale, still vast, still her mother's. "You've come," Marinette said. "You called," Elodie answered, "not with words. You never had to." They stood in silence. Around them, wind curled into spirals that smelled of ash and rosewater. "What are you now?" Elodie asked. "What he feared," Marinette said. "Not the ending of his story, but the beginning of mine. You'll be hunted. So were you. So were all of us. Will you hurt them?" Marinette tilted her head. "Only those who open doors they were told not to." Elodie stayed that night. The forest gave her shelter. The fire burned without wood. The crows blinked with human eyes, but never called. In the morning, she found herself alone. Only a single note, carved into bark, remained. "The house is not gone. It has simply changed hands." Years passed. Tales spread of girls saved from cellars and wolves, of men who vanished after dragging screaming wives into the woods, of children born under moonlight, with no fathers but too many grandmothers, and of a place deep in the forest where women walked with scars like sigils and carried knives made of bridal bone. They called her Mother Thistle, Saint Hollow, Bluebeard's bane. They built no statues, they wrote no books, but their lullabies still carry on the wind, warning, Beware the man who keeps his house locked. Beware the man who never eats but always watches. Beware the man who gives you keys but not names. And if you hear the knock on your door after sunset, don't answer, run.